Imagine sending your child to school, believing it was the safest place in the world. Then imagine finding out that behind its walls, a nightmare was unfolding in silence. For months, parents whispered. For months, fears were dismissed. But one day, during a routine visit, a German shepherd named Max stopped dead in his tracks. His nose twitched. His ears flicked forward. Then he pressed a paw to the floor and began to dig. The sound echoed, hollow. Officers exchanged glances, uncertainty turning to dread. With every scratch, tension grew. And when the boards were finally ripped away, a staircase was revealed, leading into darkness. What they found below left a country reeling. It wasn't just about the rescue of 3 frail children. It was about the betrayal of trust, the shattering of safety, and the unexpected hero who made it all possible. This story is about courage, about listening when others would rather turn away, and about how one dog gave voice to the voiceless. The townhouse on the corner of Bergen Street looked no different from the others that lined the narrow block. Its bricks were the same weathered red, its fire escape just as rusted, its curtains drawn tight against the winter night. To anyone passing by, it was another quiet Brooklyn home where children should have been sleeping, safe and warm. But inside, silence pressed like a heavy blanket, broken only by the occasional groan of wood under weight and the faint rattle of a lock sliding into place. Behind one of those curtains, 2 small figures sat together on the edge of a narrow mattress, legs drawn close, their whispers barely stirring the still air. Amelia Donovan, the older twin by 3 minutes, held her sister's cold hands tightly in her lap. She was 11, but the hollows beneath her eyes made her look older, wearier, as though childhood had been stolen piece by piece. Claire, her mirror image in face but softer in spirit, leaned against her shoulder, too tired to cry anymore. Crying had earned them nothing but Lydia's sharp voice and harsher hand. The room around them bore the marks of neglect. Paint peeled in long, curling strips from the walls. A single bulb in the ceiling flickered and buzzed, sometimes plunging them into darkness for minutes at a time before sparking back to life. The window had been boarded once, but Lydia had left one pane covered only by a heavy curtain. Even there, the glass was clouded with frost, muting the world outside until it felt impossibly far away. The girls rarely spoke above a whisper. Their stepmother, Lydia, moved like a shadow through the house, and the sound of her footsteps on the stairs made their blood run cold. The creak of each tread seemed magnified in the silence, carrying with it the threat of punishment. It didn't take much, an extra giggle after bedtime, a scrap of bread tucked away, a voice raised too loud in play. Every mistake seemed to echo until Lydia appeared, her eyes sharp, her words like broken glass. Dinner that night had been a thin soup, mostly water, a few floating vegetables, and bread that smelled faintly of mold. They had eaten without complaint, their spoons clicking softly against chipped bowls. Lydia had stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching with a look that suggested she was doing them a kindness, feeding them at all. When the bowls were empty, she had taken them away, locking the door behind her as she left. Now, in the quiet that followed, Amelia and Claire sat pressed close together, their voices caught somewhere between hope and fear. "Do you think Dad will call tonight?" Claire's voice was no more than a breath, a thought given sound. Amelia hesitated before answering. "Maybe. He usually does on Sundays." She wanted to sound certain, but the uncertainty slipped through anyway. Their father, Patrick Donovan, was a long-haul trucker, gone for weeks at a time. When he called, his voice filled the room with warmth, speaking of highways that stretched into the horizon, of diners that smelled of coffee and grease, of how proud he was of his girls. He always asked if Lydia was taking care of them, and Amelia always answered yes, because Lydia stood just out of sight, listening, and because she had learned what happened when the truth slipped out. The silence deepened, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional drip of water from the bathroom sink. Amelia let her gaze wander to the curtain. The streetlight outside cast a faint glow around its edges, hinting at a world where laughter might still exist, where other children might be finishing homework or watching TV. For the twins, that world felt locked away behind more than just fabric and glass. It was as unreachable as the moon. Claire shifted, her hair falling across her face. Amelia brushed it back gently, her small act of defiance against the coldness that surrounded them. "One day," she whispered, "we'll be free of this." Claire's eyes widened, reflecting the dim bulb overhead. "How?" Amelia didn't answer right away. Her mind drifted back to memories of their mother, who had died when they were too young to understand loss, but old enough to remember her laughter, her touch, her voice that could chase away any shadow. In her absence, the house had become a place of locked doors and swallowed voices. Yet Amelia held on to a sliver of her mother's strength, as if it had been planted in her like a seed. "We'll find a way," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. From below, a door slammed, followed by the sharp clip of Lydia's heels on the hardwood floor. The girls froze, breath held, waiting to hear if she was coming upstairs. The sound paused at the base of the steps, then faded into the kitchen. Relief came like a slow exhale, but it carried no comfort. They knew she could return at any moment. The night stretched on. The house, though filled with silence, was alive with small betrayals of sound. The whistle of wind through cracks in the window frame, the metallic clink of the radiator, the faint shifting of pipes deep within the walls. Every noise became a reminder that they were not free, that their world was reduced to this small room where the wallpaper curled like dried leaves. Claire curled tighter against Amelia, her eyelids drooping. Amelia stayed awake, listening, watching, counting the seconds between Lydia's movements. Sleep felt dangerous, yet exhaustion pulled at her anyway. Before she closed her eyes, she reached out and pressed her palm against the window pane. The glass was icy against her skin, but it connected her, however faintly, to the world outside. Beyond that thin barrier were voices, footsteps, lives being lived. Somewhere out there, their father drove through the night, believing his daughters were safe. Amelia pulled her hand back and lay beside her sister, listening to the faint hum of the house. Behind the curtain, the shadows deepened, swallowing the room in a darkness that felt too heavy for children to carry. Yet even in that silence, there was the quiet pulse of hope, fragile, flickering, but alive. And in the corner of her mind, Amelia wondered, could anyone ever hear them through the walls, through the locked door, through the curtain that hid their world from view? The highway stretched endlessly in front of him, dark asphalt glistening beneath the wash of his headlights. Patrick Donovan leaned forward against the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler, eyes rimmed with fatigue but steady, the hum of the engine his constant companion. It was another night somewhere between states, another delivery that paid the bills, but cost him more than he ever admitted. He reached over to the passenger seat where a thermos of coffee sat lukewarm, and beside it, a photograph slipped half out of its frame. The picture was of two little girls, both missing their front teeth, both smiling with an innocence that seemed impossible now. Amelia and Claire, his reason for enduring these endless miles. He kept the photo close because it was the only way he could see their faces more than a few days a month. Patrick had chosen trucking because it paid better than warehouse work, better than the factory jobs that had dried up years ago. It allowed him to keep a roof over his daughters' heads and food on the table. Or so he thought. But it also meant he was gone more often than not, trusting Lydia, his second wife, to be the caretaker he couldn't always be. He wanted to believe she loved them like her own, wanted to believe her reassurances when she picked up the phone. Tonight, as the road unspooled endlessly, he decided to call. He thumbed his cell phone from the dashboard cradle, dialed home, and listened as the rings pulsed through the static of bad reception. Finally, Lydia's voice answered, smooth and light. "Hello? Hey, it's me." He tried to keep the weariness from his voice. "How are the girls?" There was a pause, just long enough to feel like hesitation, before she answered. "They're fine, Patrick. Already asleep. You know how much energy they have during the day. Wears me right out." She let out a soft laugh, the kind that always seemed rehearsed. He smiled faintly, despite himself, wanting to believe her words. "That's good. I miss them." "Tell them Daddy's thinking of them, all right?" "Of course," Lydia said smoothly. "Don't you worry. Everything's just fine here." The words soothed him, at least on the surface. He imagined his daughters tucked in bed, blankets pulled to their chins, safe in a house that no longer echoed with the absence of their mother. That was what he needed to believe, that they were safe, that his sacrifices meant something. Yet when the call ended and silence filled the cab once more, a hollow ache settled in his chest. He stared at the road, but his thoughts wandered to the times he had come home and seen something in Amelia's eyes, something she never put into words. A shadow that passed too quickly, a hesitation when she hugged him, as though she wanted to say something but swallowed it instead. Claire was softer, always burying her face against his shirt, clinging as though she feared letting go. He had dismissed it as the natural strain of his absences. Children needed consistency, and he had none to offer. Lydia had been his answer to that problem, stepping into their lives when he could not. Still, at night on these long drives, doubts crept in like fog. Patrick turned on the radio, scanning through stations until a country song filled the cab, singing of homecomings and lost time. It cut too close, and he shut it off again, preferring the silence. Outside his window, the blur of headlights from passing cars came and went, each driver carrying their own burdens, their own lives. His burden was the distance between himself and his daughters, miles of highway that he told himself were necessary. He thought about the last visit home. He had walked through the door with gifts from the road, cheap stuffed animals from a truck stop in Ohio, a snow globe with a tiny Statue of Liberty inside. The girls had smiled, their eyes lighting up, but quickly dimming when Lydia entered the room. Lydia's hand had rested lightly on his shoulder as she praised him for working so hard, for providing. Her grip had been just a shade too firm, her smile a shade too bright. That night, Amelia had slipped him a drawing she made, a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. She hadn't said anything, just pressed it into his palm before running upstairs. He kept that drawing folded in his wallet, worn at the edges from how often he looked at it. Now, driving through the night, he pulled the wallet from his pocket and unfolded the paper with one hand. The colors had faded, but the intention behind them had not. 3 stick figures. No stepmother in sight. Just him and the girls, the way Amelia wished it could be. He swallowed hard, sliding it back into place. Loneliness settled deeper, a mirror to the isolation his daughters felt back home, though he could never know the true extent. His solitude was vast highways, greasy diners, and nights spent in parking lots beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. Theirs was a locked room, boarded windows, and the oppressive silence of a woman who had taken control in his absence. Patrick rubbed a hand across his face, fighting the sting in his eyes. "I'm doing this for them," he muttered aloud, as though the words could silence the doubt. "For their future." But even as he said it, the photograph on the passenger seat seemed to watch him, 2 smiling faces frozen in time, unaware of the shadows that had already begun to creep into their lives. The truck roared on, carrying him farther from the truth he did not yet see, and in a small, dim room back in Brooklyn, his daughters curled together against the cold, waiting for a father who did not know how desperately they needed him. The cold had settled deep into the bones of the old townhouse. It seeped through cracks in the window frame, curled beneath the thin door, and pressed against the skin of anyone who lingered too long without moving. For Amelia and Claire, it was just another night, sitting on their narrow mattress with their knees pulled to their chests, trying to steal warmth from each other. Outside, Brooklyn never truly slept. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed before sputtering silent. Voices echoed from the street corner, laughter sharp against the wind. But here, in their locked room, the girls sat in the kind of silence that felt like it might choke them. Amelia stared at the curtain-draped window. Frost crystals had spread across the glass, twisting into shapes like white veins. She could just barely make out the orange blur of a streetlight through the fabric. The outside world felt close enough to touch, yet impossibly far away. Claire shifted beside her. She was smaller, thinner, her lips chapped from the dry air. "I can't stand it anymore," she whispered, her breath clouded faintly in the chill. "It's like nobody even knows we're here." Amelia pressed her lips together, forcing back the sting in her throat. Words of comfort didn't come easily anymore. She'd learned that promises often broke before morning, and hope could be dangerous. But she tightened her arm around her sister, as though she could anchor them both. Then Claire sat up suddenly, her eyes fixed on the frosted window pane. "Maybe someone could know," she murmured, almost to herself. Amelia frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire reached out, her fingertips brushing the icy glass. It burned cold, but she pressed harder, knuckles whitening. Then she lifted her small fist and tapped, 3 times, quick and light. She paused, then tapped twice more. The sound was soft, barely louder than the creak of the radiator. But in the silence of the room, it seemed to echo. Amelia turned sharply toward her. "What are you doing?" "It's a code," Claire whispered, her eyes alive with a spark Amelia hadn't seen in weeks. 3 taps, then 2. It means, help us. Amelia's heart clenched. "No one will hear that. It's just us." Claire shook her head fiercely. "Maybe, but maybe not. If we keep doing it, maybe someone out there will notice. A person, a neighbor, someone." Her insistence carried a weight Amelia couldn't ignore. For a moment, she imagined their father on the other side of that glass, hearing the taps, breaking down the door. The vision was too painful, but it was enough to make her nod. 3, then 2, Amelia repeated softly. "Help us." That night, Claire kept tapping, soft, rhythmic knocks against the pane, almost like a heartbeat. Sometimes she varied it, pausing longer, then returning to the pattern. Amelia watched her, torn between admiration and fear. If Lydia heard it, punishment would be swift. Yet there was something mesmerizing about the steady rhythm, as though the sound itself wove a thread through the darkness, fragile but unbroken. Hours passed. Lydia's footsteps came and went below, the rattle of dishes, the slam of a cabinet. But upstairs, in that small room, Claire tapped, and Amelia listened, their shared silence filled now with the pulse of defiance. At one point, Amelia leaned in and whispered, "What if no one hears?" Claire's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Then at least we tried. At least we didn't stay quiet forever." The words lodged deep inside Amelia. They were small, nearly broken children, but in that moment, she felt a flicker of strength, born not from certainty, but from the refusal to be erased. She tried the code herself, her knuckles against the glass, mimicking the rhythm Claire had made. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. The sound was fragile, barely cutting through the hum of the old refrigerator downstairs. Yet in that frail noise lived something stronger than silence, the choice to call out. The frost clung to her fingers, numbing them, but Amelia tapped again and again until her hand ached. Together, they made a duet of soft knocks, their small fists against the cold glass, sending a secret message into the night. Beyond the curtain, beyond the pane, the city moved on, unaware. But perhaps, just perhaps, someone would notice. A passerby, a neighbor, a stranger awake at the wrong hour. Hope didn't need certainty. It only needed possibility. When they finally curled back onto the mattress, hands raw from the cold, the rhythm lingered in their minds. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. They whispered it like a prayer before sleep. Neither of them knew that across the alley, in another darkened room, an old dog's ears twitched at the faintest sound. Hunter, the retired German shepherd, lifted his head from where he lay at the foot of Walter Briggs's bed. His eyes opened, alert, and he listened, his body tense. The tapping reached him through layers of glass and distance, a sound too soft for human ears, but sharp as thunder to his own. Hunter tilted his head, brow furrowed, then gave a low whine. Walter stirred in his sleep, grumbling, but the dog did not settle. He kept listening. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. A message his human could not understand, but something in his bones told him it mattered. Back across the alley, Amelia and Claire finally drifted into sleep, unaware that their fragile code had crossed into another world. Their whispered plea, their tiny act of rebellion, had found its first witness. The night pressed on, heavy and silent, but the thread had been cast. And sometimes, the smallest sound can travel farther than anyone dares to believe. The alley behind Bergen Street was narrow, the kind of place where shadows collected and lingered long after the sun had gone down. Garbage cans lined the brick walls, their lids dented from years of use. The occasional rustle of a raccoon or the flap of wings from a stray pigeon were the only signs of life. But in a second-floor apartment overlooking that alley lived a dog whose senses never truly rested. Hunter lay stretched across a worn rug by the window, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. At 10 years old, the German shepherd carried the marks of his service. A faint scar across his left flank, a hint of stiffness in his gait when he rose, and a certain stillness in his eyes that only came from years of discipline. He had been a search and rescue K9 once, trained to track human scent through rubble and flood, trained to listen where chaos drowned out human ears. Retirement had changed his surroundings, but not his instincts. The muscles beneath his dark coat still twitched at sudden sounds. His ears still pricked at the faintest vibration, a door slam, a cough, the rattle of a lock in the distance. He no longer wore the harness that once identified him as a working dog, but in his heart, duty had never been shed. His owner, Walter Briggs, sat in a recliner nearby, a heavy wool blanket across his lap. Walter was 72, a widowed veteran whose life had slowed to the pace of routine, mornings with black coffee, afternoons with the newspaper, evenings with the radio murmuring old jazz. Hunter was his only constant companion, the one soul who filled the silence that had followed his wife's passing 5 years earlier. Walter often joked that they were both relics, an old soldier and his four-legged partner, outliving the roles that had once defined them, but deep down he knew it wasn't true. Hunter wasn't finished, not really. Sometimes Walter caught him staring out the window, ears tilting toward sounds no human could hear, and thought, he's waiting for something. He still thinks there's a mission left. That evening, as the winter wind howled down the alley, Walter lowered the volume on the radio and glanced at his companion. "You hearing ghosts again, boy?" he asked softly. His voice carried the gravel of years, but there was warmth threaded through it. Hunter shifted, his paws crossing neatly in front of him, golden brown eyes steady on Walter. He gave no bark, only a quiet sigh, as though answering with patience. Walter chuckled and reached down to scratch behind his ear. Their life together was simple, marked by small rituals. Every morning, Hunter padded beside Walter as he made the slow journey down the stairwell to collect the mail. Every afternoon, he settled by the window, watching the alley as though guarding it from threats no one else could see. At night, he slept lightly, often rising at the faintest noise to patrol the small apartment before returning to his post. Neighbors knew the dog. Children waved from the sidewalk, shouting, "Hi, Hunter," when they saw his silhouette in the window. Some were told he had once been a hero, that he had found missing people in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, that he had pulled a lost child from the rubble of a collapsed warehouse. The stories traveled like whispers, half believed, half myth. Walter never corrected them. Hunter didn't need glory, but the truth of his service was written in his bearing, in the quiet authority of his stance. That night, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Walter sat back in his chair, eyes heavy, while Hunter remained at the window. The curtain shifted with a draft, letting in a thin band of streetlight that fell across his muzzle. His ears twitched, nose lifting slightly. Somewhere across the alley, there was a sound, so faint it would have been lost to any ordinary listener. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Hunter stilled, head cocking to one side. The rhythm repeated, almost like a heartbeat. His muscles tightened, breath quickening. It wasn't random. He knew patterns. He had been trained to recognize signals buried in chaos. This was deliberate. Walter dozed, unaware, while Hunter's eyes locked on the darkened townhouse across the way. Behind one of its shuttered windows, something stirred. He gave a low growl, not of aggression, but of recognition. Something was wrong. He rose to his feet, joints stiff but strong, and padded closer to the glass. His nose touched the cold pane, ears straining, body taut with focus. Again the sound came. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Hunter gave a sharp bark, sudden and loud in the quiet apartment. Walter jolted awake, blinking, his blanket sliding to the floor. "What the?" "Hunter." "What is it, boy?" The dog barked again, pawing at the window, his tail stiff, his stance urgent. Walter frowned, rubbing his eyes. He followed Hunter's gaze across the alley, but all he saw was the dark line of the townhouse, curtains drawn tight. "There's nothing there," he muttered. "Just shadows." But Hunter didn't relent. His body pressed forward, claws scraping lightly against the sill. His bark was not the restless kind Walter had heard before. It carried weight, a demand, a warning. Walter sighed and leaned forward in his chair, studying the dog he had come to trust more than most people. Hunter's instincts had never failed him in the years he'd known him. Even now, retired and grey around the muzzle, the shepherd's body was a vessel for senses honed sharper than a blade. "All right," Walter murmured, reaching out to rest a hand on the dog's back. "I'll keep my eyes open. You tell me if it happens again." Hunter's gaze never left the window. His breathing slowed, but his stance did not relax. To Walter, it was as though the dog had heard a language he himself could not decipher. Across the alley, in the cold, shuttered room of the Donovan twins, silence fell once more. But the code had been sent, and the first soul had heard it. Not a human, but a dog who had never forgotten what it meant to save a life. Hunter lowered himself back onto the rug after a long while, but his eyes remained open, ears twitching at every shift in the night. Retirement had given him comfort, but it had not dulled his calling. Somewhere in the shadows he knew someone needed him. And when that call came again, he would be ready. The night settled heavy over Brooklyn, the kind of winter night where the cold seemed to sharpen every sound. The city never truly slept. Horns still blared in the distance. Subway trains rumbled below the streets. But in the narrow alley behind Bergen Street, the noise thinned into something fragile, easily broken. Hunter lay by the window, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. Age had brought him stiffness, yes, but not sleep. His body moved between rest and readiness, every muscle still wired with the discipline of his years in service. It was then that he heard it, faint, almost lost against the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the hiss of the old radiator. 3 soft taps, a pause, and then 2 more. His ears flicked upright. The sound was not random. It carried rhythm. It came from across the alley, from the darkened townhouse where curtains never moved. Hunter rose to his feet, silent as a shadow. His tail stiffened, nose lifting toward the cold glass. The tapping repeated, weak but deliberate. He let out a low rumble in his throat, more breath than bark, the kind of sound he had once given when catching the scent of a missing child in rubble. His body told him, "Pay attention. Something is here." From the recliner, Walter Briggs stirred. The old veteran glanced at the clock glowing on the side table. Nearly midnight. He rubbed his eyes and muttered, "What's got into you now, boy?" Hunter padded to the window, pressing his muzzle against the frosted pane. His claws scratched lightly at the sill, a restless movement he couldn't contain. His whole body trembled with focus, ears straining for the faint rhythm he had heard. Walter pushed himself up, joints protesting. "Hunter," he called softly, voice carrying that gravel of age. "It's just the wind, or pipes knocking. Don't startle yourself over shadows." But Hunter didn't move. He whined, sharp and insistent, his tail rigid, eyes locked on the townhouse across the way. Walter followed his gaze. The alley was quiet. A trash can lid rattled in the wind. The curtains of the Donovan house were still drawn, no light escaping through the cracks. Nothing moved. "I don't hear a damn thing," Walter muttered. He shuffled toward the kitchen, filling a glass of water. Behind him, Hunter barked once, sudden and sharp, the sound bouncing off the walls. "Hey," Walter scolded, setting the glass down. "Hush now. You'll wake the neighbors." But Hunter barked again, pawing at the glass, nails clicking. The urgency in his stance made Walter pause. This wasn't restlessness. It wasn't the ordinary alertness to city noise. It was insistence. Hunter's entire frame was taut, alive, as though his body remembered a command it hadn't been given. Walter sighed, his shoulders sagging. He had learned over years of companionship that Hunter rarely barked without reason. Still, logic pressed in. What could there be? The Donovans were a quiet family. Lydia, the stepmother, always waved politely when their paths crossed. He had glimpsed the twin girls once or twice from the distance of the alley window, but not recently. Children had school, lives inside. It wasn't unusual. "Old instincts," Walter murmured, almost to himself, as he sank back into his chair. "You're hearing what ain't there anymore." Hunter turned his head, giving him a brief look, those deep, amber eyes steady, almost reproachful. Then he returned to the window, ears pricked, body braced. The tapping came once more, faint and nearly swallowed by the winter wind. Hunter's head snapped toward it instantly. His breath fogged the glass as he pressed closer. Walter looked up sharply this time, startled by the dog's reaction. "Damn," he whispered, frowning. He strained his ears, but heard nothing except the creak of the old pipes in the wall. "I don't—" His voice trailed off. Hunter scratched the window again, restless. His body leaned forward as though he could push through the glass itself. His bark building low in his throat, but held back by training. He knew the difference between noise and signal. This was no coincidence. Walter rubbed a hand across his face, torn between trust and doubt. He remembered nights long ago in uniform, when his instincts told him danger was near, though the air seemed calm. He had survived because he listened then. But now he was a tired old man, and this was just his dog reacting to shadows. Wasn't it? "Enough," Walter said softly, voice more weary than stern. "Lay down." Reluctantly, Hunter retreated a step, but his eyes did not leave the window. He lowered himself onto the rug, chest heaving, ears still alert. Even as his body obeyed, his mind remained locked on the rhythm that had broken the night silence. Walter turned off the lamp, letting the room sink into shadow. The glow from the alley stretched across Hunter's fur, outlining the strong shape of a dog who could no longer rest easily. The veteran sat back in his chair, uneasy in a way he couldn't quite name. He told himself it was nothing. But in the darkness, with Hunter lying rigid on the rug, he felt the first curl of doubt tighten in his chest. Across the alley, in the Donovan house, two small hands rested against the cold glass. Amelia and Claire whispered their secret code. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. They didn't know if anyone would hear, but a dog had. And though his owner dismissed it, Hunter's heart carried the sound like a promise. He would not forget. The night passed, but for Hunter, sleep never came. The first night had unsettled Walter. The second left him restless. By the third, even he could no longer ignore it. Each time it came the same way, Soft, deliberate knocks in the dark. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Faint enough that Walter told himself he might be imagining things, yet Hunter never wavered. The shepherd's reactions were sharper than Walter had seen in years. He would lift his head from sleep, ears pricked, tail stiff, eyes glowing in the dim light, like embers fanned awake. Then came the pacing, back and forth across the rug, claws clicking on the floorboards, a low whine building in his throat. When the tapping continued, he would bark sharply, throwing his body toward the window as if sheer willpower could break the glass. On the second night, Walter tried scolding him. "Enough! It's nothing, Hunter." His voice cracked with frustration. But Hunter had not backed down. He scratched the sill, nails carving faint grooves into the wood, his entire body alive with urgency. By the third night, Walter no longer bothered to silence him. He only watched. He watched as the dog he had trusted with his quietest years seemed to transform back into the canine he once was, alert to danger no one else perceived. The pattern wore at Walter's mind. He lay awake long after the tapping faded, staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator hiss. He told himself it was nothing more than pipes or shifting beams, the ordinary groans of an old building. But something in Hunter's persistence unsettled him. A dog could be fooled once, but not night after night. On the 4th evening, Walter brewed his coffee stronger, determined to stay awake. He sat in his recliner with the lamp dimmed, the city's glow seeping faintly through the curtains. Hunter lay coiled by the window, muscles taut, as though waiting for the call. Hours crept by. Midnight came and went. Walter's eyes drooped, head nodding forward, until Hunter stiffened. The sound came again. 3 faint taps, a pause, 2 taps. Hunter barked, claws raking the sill, body lunging forward. Walter jolted upright, heart pounding. This time he swore he heard it, softer than a fingertip on wood, but there, buried beneath the wind, his breath caught. Walter crossed the room, pressing his own ear to the cold glass. He held his breath, straining. Silence at first. Then, yes. 3. Pause. 2. His stomach dropped. He pulled back, staring across the alley. The Donovan townhouse stood dark, its curtains drawn tight. Not a single window glowed. Nothing moved. But the sound had been real. Behind him, Hunter barked again, deep and insistent. His gaze locked on that house, like a soldier on target. His tail did not wag. His stance carried no play. This was business, the kind Walter hadn't seen in him since his service days. Walter rubbed a hand over his mouth. Memories stirred. The missions he had lived through decades ago. The gut feelings that had saved his life when logic failed. Instinct, they had called it. The ability to sense what others could not. He had trusted it then. And Hunter's instincts had once found children buried beneath rubble. Mothers trapped in floodwaters. Men lost in storms. Could he dismiss them now? And yet, Lydia Donovan. She was polite, respectable, always friendly in passing. She had even brought Walter a casserole once when his hip surgery kept him homebound. Nothing about her suggested danger. The twins, though, he realized suddenly how long it had been since he'd seen them. Months, maybe more. He remembered their thin faces flashing by a window once, but nothing since. Hunter's whine broke his thoughts. The dog pawed at him now, eyes pleading in a way that pierced through Walter's doubts. Walter sank back into his chair, heart heavy. "I don't know what you're hearing, boy," he whispered, "but I believe you think it matters." Hunter did not look away. His chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, but his gaze remained fixed on the townhouse, as if daring Walter to act. The days that followed carried the same rhythm. Tapping at night. Hunter's restless response. Walter's gnawing unease. By the end of the week, the old veteran no longer dismissed it as random noise. Something was happening across that alley. He just didn't know what. He tried, in his quiet way, to reason it out. Perhaps the girls had invented a game. Children were inventive. Maybe they had taken to drumming on the window to pass time. Yet the sound was too precise, too insistent. A pattern repeated night after night was not a game. It was a message. The thought chilled him. One evening, as the wind howled and Hunter growled low at the window, Walter whispered, "If they're sending a message, then to who? Who are they hoping hears?" Hunter answered with another sharp bark, the kind that made Walter's heart jolt in his chest. Walter stood at the window then, looking out into the alley, into the rows of lifeless curtains. For the first time in years, he felt the echo of a soldier's burden settle back on his shoulders, the weight of knowing something was wrong, and the question of whether he would have the courage to act. Behind him, Hunter paced, restless and unwavering, his loyalty pressing like a force in the room. The tapping had planted a seed, and though Walter could not yet explain it, he knew the truth was clawing its way toward the surface. Some nights, the silence that followed was worse than the tapping itself, because silence meant someone, somewhere, had stopped knocking. Lydia Donovan had perfected the art of masks. To the neighbors, she was the picture of polite resilience, an elegant woman left to manage a household, while her husband worked long, punishing hours on the road. She greeted people on the sidewalk with a warm smile, asked about their families, carried a casserole to the widow down the block when her furnace broke. Her voice was lilting, her eyes bright, her hands steady. But when the door closed and the lock slid into place, the mask cracked. Inside the Donovan townhouse, Lydia's tone sharpened like broken glass. The warmth drained from her eyes, replaced by something colder, something watchful. Amelia and Claire knew this version too well. It was the one that haunted their days and nights. The twins sat side by side at the kitchen table, their legs dangling from chairs too tall for their small frames. Before them lay 2 pieces of stale bread, spread thinly with margarine. Dinner. Lydia paced the kitchen, her heels clicking against the linoleum, her fingers wrapped around a glass of wine. "You should be grateful," she said, her smile thin, but her words sharp. "There are children out there who don't even get this." Claire swallowed hard, her stomach growling. Amelia placed a protective hand on her sister's arm, a silent warning. "Don't answer." But Lydia thrived on silence. She leaned forward suddenly, her voice rising. "Nothing to say? After everything I do for you, not even a thank you?" Her voice dripped with accusation, twisting generosity into cruelty. The girls had learned to survive by staying quiet, but Lydia never let quiet be enough. She would push until their silence broke, until guilt and fear spilled from them like water from a cracked glass. When Amelia whispered, "Thank you," Lydia smiled sweetly, satisfied, but her eyes lingered with a glint of victory. After dinner, she herded them upstairs to the locked room. "Your father doesn't need to know how ungrateful you are," she said, her tone soft, almost sing-song. "If he asks, you'll tell him I treat you well, won't you?" The girls nodded automatically. They knew the script, because Lydia had told them many times before, "No one will believe you." She said it in 1,000 different ways, sometimes with a laugh, shaking her head as though the very idea of them speaking out was absurd. sometimes with a whisper in their ear, sharp and close. If you try to tell, they'll think you're a liar. They'll think you're crazy. And sometimes she said it with her hands, gripping an arm too tightly, pushing them toward the locked door, leaving bruises where words alone would not suffice. Gaslight became their oxygen. Amelia tried to hold on to memories of their real mother. A laugh that filled the kitchen, hands that smelled of lavender soap, stories told at night to chase away fear. But Lydia poisoned those memories too. "She wasn't as perfect as you think," Lydia said once, her smile cruel. "She left you. I'm the one taking care of you now. Who do you think people will believe? The dead woman or me?" That night, Amelia cried into her pillow, not because she believed Lydia, but because she was terrified others might. Claire, softer and more trusting, was especially vulnerable to Lydia's words. Whenever she tried to whisper to Amelia about escaping, about telling someone, Lydia seemed to know. She would crouch low, level her gaze with Claire's, and say gently, almost lovingly, "If you tell, they'll take you away. They'll split you up. You'll never see your sister again. Is that what you want?" Claire would crumble, shaking her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Amelia would hold her after Lydia left, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even to her own ears. The cruelest part was how convincing Lydia was outside those walls. On Sundays, when neighbors saw her on the stoop, she laughed easily, waved to children, complimented the postman on his new haircut. Once, she even hosted a book club in the living room, offering tea and biscuits, while Amelia and Claire sat locked upstairs, listening to the muffled sound of voices drifting through the floor. Downstairs, the women praised Lydia for her resilience. "It must be so hard with Patrick gone so often," they said. "You're doing such a good job with those girls." Lydia only smiled, modest but glowing, basking in the affirmation. Upstairs, Amelia gripped Claire's hand tightly, whispering, "No one knows. No one can see." It was true. To the outside world, Lydia was kind, even selfless. The girls knew differently, but their world was locked and boarded. Their words would carry no weight against hers. This was Lydia's control. Not just the lock on the door, or the stale food on the table, but the prison she built inside their minds. She twisted the truth until it bent into lies, then forced them to carry those lies like chains. Each night, when she finally turned the key and left them in their room, her voice echoed behind the door. "Remember," she said, her tone honeyed and sharp at once, "no one will believe you. I'm all you have." The girls would sit in silence afterward, their breaths shallow, the words digging deeper into their bones. And yet, in the quiet, Amelia felt something stubborn rise inside her, a defiance born not of strength, but of survival. "If no one believes us," she thought, "then we'll find another way." And when Claire began tapping on the window, sending their secret message into the night, Amelia knew it was not just an act of desperation. It was a rebellion. It was the first crack in Lydia's perfect mask. The mask would hold a while longer. Out in public, Lydia would keep smiling, keep fooling the world. But behind closed doors, the control that seemed unshakable was already beginning to fray. And Hunter, across the alley, had heard the first threads snap. The room where Amelia and Claire spent most of their days was not much larger than a storage closet. Once, it had probably been a child's bedroom, with wallpaper patterned faintly with faded stars. But the years had stripped it of warmth, leaving only a skeleton of what it might have been. The single window was their only view of the outside world, and even that had been stolen from them. Thick boards crossed over most of the glass, nailed tight by Lydia's hands. Only one narrow pane remained uncovered, curtained with heavy fabric that barely let in a sliver of light. In the daytime, a faint glow spilled into the room, just enough to remind them of a world they could not reach. At night, it was nothing more than darkness layered on darkness. The door was worse. A heavy padlock clung to the hasp like a metal sentinel, its weight more symbolic than necessary. The girls rarely tried to open it anymore. They knew it would not yield. The metallic rattle when Lydia turned the key had become their clock, marking the boundaries of their lives. Locked in at night. Released in the morning only under her watchful eye. Their mattress sagged in the middle, its fabric torn, stuffing poking out in small tufts. They shared it because there was no space for two. Their small bodies curled together for warmth when winter pressed through the walls. The thin blanket smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how many times they tried to air it out. Above them, the ceiling had long since cracked. A jagged line spread like a scar from one corner to the other, and sometimes, when the wind was strong, dust sifted down from it, coating the floor in a fine grey powder. Amelia had once tried to count the cracks, to trace them like maps of escape routes. Claire imagined they were lightning bolts frozen in time, reminders that even the house bore its own fractures. Their possessions were few. A pair of dolls missing limbs, abandoned long ago by another child. A notebook with pages filled by Amelia's shaky handwriting. Tiny stories that ended in freedom because she couldn't bear to write otherwise. Claire kept scraps of string and buttons, collecting them like treasures, weaving them into little patterns they pretended were jewelry. Survival meant finding value in the smallest things. To pass the hours, they invented games. Whispers became their playground, secrets traded like currency. Sometimes they pretended the cracks in the ceiling were constellations, and they gave them names their mother might have liked. Other times, they pressed their ears to the cold wall, listening for sounds from the alley. The faint hum of a passing car, a voice carried in the wind, footsteps on the sidewalk. Those sounds reminded them that life still pulsed beyond their cage, even if it did not reach them. But survival required silence as much as imagination. The walls were thin, and Lydia's ears were sharp. One raised laugh could bring the pounding of heels on the stairs. The door flung open, her shadow filling the frame. Punishment didn't always come in blows. Sometimes it came in withheld meals, or the cruel twist of words designed to remind them they were powerless. The girls learned to measure everything in whispers. Whispered games, whispered hopes, whispered plans that never seemed possible but needed to be spoken anyway. At night, Amelia often whispered stories to Claire. They weren't fairy tales, not exactly. They were fragments of memory, of their mother brushing their hair by the window, of their father swinging them both onto his shoulders, of summer days in the park when laughter had no price. She told these memories like chapters from a book, repeating them until Claire could recite them word for word. They clung to those stories like ropes in the dark, reminders that life had once been kind, and perhaps could be again. Still, confinement wore on them. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. The cold seeped into their bones. But worse than either was the way time dissolved into sameness. Day after day, week after week, each moment bleeding into the next. Without clocks, without school, without the markers of ordinary life, they lost track of how long they had been locked away. "Do you think Dad knows?" Claire asked one night, her voice trembling against Amelia's shoulder. Amelia hesitated. Lying to her sister felt cruel, But truth felt crueler. "He doesn't," she whispered back. "If he did, he'd come for us. He'd break down the door." The words brought tears to Claire's eyes, but also a flicker of comfort. And so they survived, trapped in their narrow world. Sometimes, when Lydia left the door unlocked for a few minutes, Amelia dared to inch it open. But the hallway beyond was dim, narrow, and watched. At the top of the stairs, she could see the front door, but the chain lock glimmered even from a distance, mocking her. Freedom dangled close, but impossibly out of reach. So they returned to the room. Always, the hidden room. The room where their laughter had withered into whispers, where their voices carried weight only between themselves. And yet, in this confinement, something had been born. A rhythm against the window pane. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Their secret code, their rebellion. The room had taken everything. Light, warmth, safety. But it had not taken their will to be heard. And unbeknownst to them, across the alley, a dog's ears had caught that fragile defiance, holding on to it as though it were a command, waiting to be fulfilled. The bell above the corner store door jingled as Lydia stepped inside, her heels clicking crisply against the worn tile. The air smelled of ground coffee and oranges stacked neatly by the register. Behind the counter, Mr. Alvarez, who had owned the shop for 30 years, looked up from his newspaper and broke into a warm smile. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Donovan," he said. "Out braving the cold again?" Lydia laughed softly, her gloved hand fluttering to her chest, as if she were flattered by the recognition. "Oh, you know me, Mr. Alvarez. The girls need their milk and bread, no matter the weather." She leaned lightly against the counter, her posture graceful, her smile practiced. To the people of Bergen Street, Lydia Donovan was a picture of composure, a woman who carried herself with elegance despite her circumstances. Neighbors whispered sympathetically about how hard it must be to raise 2 children while Patrick was away so often, driving his truck across state lines. Lydia never complained, never burdened others with her struggles. Instead, she presented herself as quietly capable, endlessly patient. What no one saw, what no one even suspected, was the venom beneath the smile. "Those twins of yours must be growing fast," Mr. Alvarez continued. "Haven't seen them in a while." Lydia's smile didn't falter. "Oh, you know how children are. Always busy, always underfoot. They've been catching up on schoolwork, and with this weather, I prefer to keep them inside where it's warm." The lie slid off her tongue with ease. She adjusted her scarf, her eyes bright but unreadable. Mr. Alvarez nodded, satisfied, and returned to bagging her purchases. Other shoppers greeted her as they passed, and Lydia responded with warmth. To Mrs. Henderson, she complimented the new hat her daughter had knitted. To young Officer Patel, grabbing a coffee on his break, she expressed gratitude for keeping the neighborhood safe. Every word was deliberate, designed to reinforce her place as a caring mother, a devoted wife, a pillar of quiet strength. No one questioned her. Why would they? Lydia Donovan smiled too often, too convincingly, for suspicion to creep in. Yet the contrast was sharp, brutal, for those who knew the other Lydia, the one waiting behind the padlocked door. Upstairs in the hidden room, Amelia and Claire sat in silence, their stomachs growling faintly. They could hear faint echoes of the city below. Car horns, footsteps, even Lydia's voice, drifting faintly from the street as she greeted neighbors. That sound cut deep, because it was proof that she wore 2 faces, and the world adored the wrong one. "She sounds so nice out there," Claire whispered once, clutching her doll with its missing arm. like she's not even the same person. "She's lying," Amelia said firmly, though her voice trembled. "She's always lying." And yet, what hurt most was the knowledge that the neighbors believed Lydia, not them. If the twins ever tried to tell the truth, who would take the word of two pale, frightened girls over the smiling stepmother who baked cookies for block parties? That was Lydia's genius, her cruelty hidden beneath layers of charm. She never raised her voice in public, never let her mask slip where others might see. Her cruelty lived in shadows, in whispers behind locked doors, in the subtle gaslighting that made the twins doubt even themselves. At the store, Lydia accepted her bag of groceries with a gracious smile. "Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. You always make things easier for me. You know how Patrick worries when he's away. But I tell him, the neighborhood looks after us." "He's lucky to have you," Mr. Alvarez said sincerely. And there it was, the triumph Lydia carried home. Respect, admiration, the assurance that no one would ever believe the truth if it came from Amelia or Claire. When she stepped back into the townhouse, the air shifted. The smile slid from her face like a mask being unhooked. Her eyes sharpened, her mouth tightened. She placed the groceries on the counter with deliberate force and called up the stairs. "Girls?" The twins froze where they sat, the sound of her voice carrying a weight that sent their hearts racing. Amelia squeezed Claire's hand, bracing for what would come next. In the store, Lydia had been warm and gracious. Here, she was something else entirely. She climbed the stairs, her heels striking like gunshots. When she opened the padlocked door, her expression was no longer kind. "You will eat when I say you eat," she snapped, her tone dripping with contempt. "And don't you forget, if you think anyone out there cares about you, you're wrong. They see me. They believe me. No one believes little girls who lie." Her words carved deeper than hunger, deeper than cold. The girls stayed silent, because silence was survival. When the door shut again, when the lock clicked back into place, Amelia pressed her forehead to the wall and whispered, "One day, someone will see." Across the alley, Hunter stirred at the sound of the door slamming. His ears twitched, his body tense, as though even he could sense the shift in the house. He moved closer to the window, eyes fixed on the Donovan home. The mask Lydia wore outside could fool the world, but it could not fool him. The night was still, save for the faint hum of traffic several blocks away, and the distant clatter of the elevated train. Walter Briggs was deep in sleep. His body slumped into the grooves of the old recliner. The radio, left on low, murmured the faint echoes of a jazz station, saxophone notes spilling softly into the dark. But Hunter was awake. He lay near the window, as he always did, his body curled yet tense, his ears pricked for sounds that didn't belong. For weeks now, his nights had been restless. The pattern across the alley, the taps, had not left his mind. Even when silence filled the Donovan house, he listened. And tonight, the silence was different. He felt it before he heard it. A faint scrape, a shuffle, then a sound, sharp, muffled, desperate. Hunter's head shot up, ears straining. He stood abruptly, his claws tapping against the floorboards. The growl started low in his chest, rolling up like distant thunder. His body moved toward the window in quick, purposeful steps, tail rigid as a rod. The sound came again, clearer this time, a faint thud, followed by hurried tapping. Hunter barked, sudden and explosive, the sound tearing through the stillness of the apartment. Walter jolted awake, heart pounding, the blanket slipping to the floor. "Hunter!" he gasped, his voice rough with sleep. "What the devil's gotten into you?" But Hunter didn't stop. He barked furiously, his body hurling toward the window, claws scraping as he tried to climb the sill. His muzzle pressed against the glass, fogging it with each sharp breath. He barked again, louder, each sound charged with urgency. Walter pushed himself up, his hip aching as he stumbled toward the dog. "Quiet down, boy. You'll wake the whole block." His hands reached for Hunter's collar, but the shepherd twisted free, pacing back and forth in front of the window. His growl deepened, vibrating in the floorboards. He barked once more, then paused, ears tilting toward the Donovan house. Walter followed his gaze. The townhouse across the alley loomed silent, its curtains drawn, its windows dark. To Walter's eyes, it was nothing more than shadows stacked against the winter night. But Hunter's instincts flared. He growled again, his teeth bared, his body trembling with focus. "Hunter?" Walter tried again, softer this time, his voice carrying the weight of fatigue and concern. "It's nothing. Just the wind. Or the pipes again." But even as he said it, doubt wormed through his chest. This wasn't the restless bark of a dog chasing dreams. This was the bark he remembered from Hunter's working days, the bark of discovery, of warning. It was the sound of urgency that meant pay attention. Something is wrong. Walter rested a trembling hand on Hunter's back. The dog's muscles quivered under his palm, coiled tight as a spring. He could feel the vibration of the growl deep inside Hunter's chest, a living drumbeat. Across the alley, Amelia sat by the narrow pane of uncovered glass, her fingers tapping desperately. Claire crouched beside her, eyes wide, whispering, "Will anyone hear?" Amelia's voice shook. "He will." She pointed toward the faint outline of the German shepherd across the alley. She couldn't see him clearly through the frost and curtain, but she knew he was there. The dog who barked when they tapped. The dog who hadn't forgotten. Hunter's bark rose again, feral and commanding, cutting through the night. Walter winced, glancing toward the thin apartment walls that separated him from his neighbors. Lights flicked on in the building across the street. A window opened somewhere, and someone shouted angrily, "Shut that dog up!" Walter's face flushed with embarrassment. "Damn it, Hunter," he muttered, pulling at the collar again. But Hunter resisted, lunging back toward the Donovan house. He growled, barked, then whined in frustration, pacing tight circles like a soldier forced to stand still when every instinct demanded action. Walter stared at the townhouse again, unease crawling down his spine. He wanted to dismiss it, to tell himself it was nothing, that his old dog was just restless, haunted by echoes of training. But something in Hunter's eyes, those sharp amber eyes that had never lied, held him still. He whispered, almost against his will, "What are you hearing, boy?" Hunter didn't answer, but his body did. He barked once more, the sound raw, urgent, a call that demanded belief. Walter pressed his hand to the glass, staring out into the alley where shadows clung like secrets. For the first time, he admitted to himself, maybe this wasn't nothing. Maybe his old partner wasn't barking at ghosts. Hunter gave a final growl, then pressed his body against the window as if to push through. His tail lashed once, twice, before he stilled, ears forward, waiting. Walter stood beside him, his own breath fogging the cold glass. The silence that followed felt louder than the barking had, weighted with meaning. He didn't yet understand it, but he could no longer deny it. Something was wrong in that house. Morning light fell pale and brittle across the alley, bouncing off frosted windows and settling into Walter Briggs's apartment. He sat at the small kitchen table, nursing his second cup of black coffee. His hands trembled slightly, not only from age, but from the memory of the night before. Hunter's furious barking, the growls that refused to fade, the desperate way his old partner had pressed against the window, as if trying to break through. Walter had barely slept. He had dozed in the recliner, the dog curled restlessly by the door, both of them half alert. And now, as sunlight revealed the ordinary world, delivery trucks rattling past, children on their way to school, it all felt strangely wrong. The Donovan house across the alley sat too still, curtains pulled too tight. Hunter paced by the window again, low rumbles in his throat. His eyes locked on the house, unwavering. Walter rubbed at his temples. "All right, boy. We'll check." He pulled on his coat and hat, slipped Hunter's leash over his head, and together they made their way down the narrow stairwell and across the alley. The Donovan townhouse loomed, its bricks weathered, its porch sagging slightly under years of neglect. Walter mounted the steps slowly, the boards creaking beneath his weight. He raised his hand and knocked. The door opened within seconds, as though Lydia had been waiting. She stood in a tidy sweater, her hair brushed into a neat knot, her expression one of pleasant surprise. "Mr. Briggs," she said warmly, her voice smooth as honey. "What a nice surprise." Walter shifted uneasily, tipping his cap. "Morning, Mrs. Donovan. Sorry to trouble you. Hunter was barking something fierce last night, seemed agitated by something coming from your place." Lydia's smile never faltered. "Oh, that old dog of yours. He has such sharp ears, doesn't he? But I assure you, everything's fine here." "The girls were fast asleep upstairs." Walter nodded slowly, but Hunter tugged at the leash, his body rigid. He growled, low and steady, his eyes locked on Lydia, as though he saw through her skin. The sound made Lydia's smile tighten, just for an instant. Now, she said lightly, tilting her head at the shepherd. "There's no need for that. You've got him on edge, Mr. Briggs. Perhaps he needs more rest." Walter cleared his throat, the unease settling deeper in his chest. He had known Hunter for years, through storms and rescues, through quiet nights and chaos. The dog had never growled at a neighbor, never bared his teeth at someone without reason. Yet now, his lips curled back, teeth flashing white, his growl vibrating through the wooden porch boards. Walter pulled gently on the leash. "Easy, boy. Easy." But Hunter's eyes didn't leave Lydia's face. His hackles rose, his body bristling, every inch of him alert. Lydia chuckled, though the sound was thinner now. "He must smell the groceries I just carried in. Dogs are funny like that." Walter studied her closely. Her hands were too still on the doorframe, her voice too measured. He'd seen enough people wear masks in his life to know when one was being forced. "I just wanted to be sure," he said finally, his voice soft but steady. "Didn't mean to intrude." "No intrusion at all," Lydia replied quickly. "It's kind of you to ask, truly. But everything is perfectly fine. The girls are just resting. They've been under the weather, you know. Winter colds." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "You know how children are. Always something to worry about." Walter nodded again, but the knot in his gut tightened. Hunter's growl had grown sharper, more insistent, his teeth bared fully now. The dog's eyes seemed to cut straight through Lydia, unblinking. "All right," Walter said finally, pulling gently on the leash. "I'll let you get back to your morning." Lydia's smile widened again, the mask slipping back into place. "Thank you for stopping by, Mr. Briggs. You're such a thoughtful neighbor." But Hunter refused to move. He planted his paws on the porch, staring at her with an intensity that made Walter's skin crawl. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Lydia's expression flickered. Just for a heartbeat, her eyes hardened, sharp and cold, before softening again into their polite mask. Walter caught it. So did Hunter. The dog lunged forward suddenly, snarling, his teeth flashing inches from Lydia's legs. Walter yanked the leash hard, his own heart slamming in his chest. "Hunter!" he barked. Lydia gasped, though her voice carried more annoyance than fear. "Really, Mr. Briggs? You must keep him under control." Walter muttered apologies, dragging Hunter back down the steps, his mind spinning. He had never seen the shepherd react like this, not without cause. Back across the alley, safe in his apartment, Walter sank into the recliner, his hands trembling. Hunter paced by the window, growling softly, his eyes never leaving the Donovan house. Walter stared out, his chest tight. Lydia's smile replayed in his mind, brittle and false. And behind it, the flicker of something darker. He whispered to himself, "What are you hiding?" Hunter's ears flicked, his body still taut with focus. He whined softly, pressing his nose against the glass, as though begging Walter to see what he already knew. Across the alley, behind boarded windows and padlocked doors, Amelia and Claire sat in silence, listening to the footsteps fade. They had heard Hunter's bark outside, sharp and furious. And for the first time in weeks, a fragile hope stirred inside them. Someone had noticed. The fourth night began like the others, cloaked in winter silence. The city outside moved on, sirens in the distance, a subway rattling beneath the streets. But in the narrow alley behind Bergen Street, quietly clung like frost. Walter Briggs had gone to bed earlier than usual, exhaustion pressing against his bones. He told himself he was too old to let a dog's barking keep him awake, too tired to keep peering across the alley at shadows he could not explain. He had convinced himself that he had overreacted, that Lydia's warm smile at the door should have been enough proof that nothing was wrong. But Hunter had not forgotten. The German shepherd lay near the front door, restless. His chest rose and fell quickly, his ears twitching at every shift of sound from the Donovan house. His paws tapped lightly against the rug, as though he were holding himself back, as though the leash around his neck was already pulling him forward. Then it came again. 3 faint taps. A pause. 2 more. Hunter was on his feet in an instant, claws scraping against the floorboards. He barked, sharp and furious, the sound exploding into the still apartment. Walter stirred awake, groaning, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Hunter," he muttered. "Not again." But the dog did not stop. He ran to the door, barking wildly, his body slamming against it as if trying to break free. His claws raked the wood, leaving fresh grooves where he had already scratched before. Then he turned back, pawing at the leash hanging from its hook, whining in desperation. Walter sat up fully now, heart racing. "What is it, boy?" Hunter howled, long, mournful, urgent. It was a sound Walter hadn't heard since the dog's working days, when he'd found a body buried beneath rubble after a storm. It was a call no handler could ignore, a cry that said, "There's life. There's danger. Do something." Walter's throat tightened. He shuffled to the door, gripping the frame for balance, and stared at his dog. Hunter's amber eyes burned with intensity, unrelenting, begging him to listen. The sound came again from across the alley, faint, desperate. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Walter froze. He had heard it before, thought he'd imagined it, dismissed it as coincidence, but not tonight. Tonight the rhythm was too clear, too insistent, and Hunter's reaction left no room for doubt. The shepherd pawed harder at the leash, yanking it down from the hook. The leather strap fell to the floor, and Hunter grabbed it in his teeth, pulling it toward Walter, growling through clenched jaws. Walter's hands shook. He bent slowly, picking up the leash, his mind torn between disbelief and the sharp edge of instinct. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "This can't be." But Hunter howled again, pulling at the strap, his body pressed against the door with all his weight. Walter closed his eyes, the memories flooding back. Nights in uniform, when instinct had whispered of ambush, when listening to a gut feeling had saved his life. He had learned long ago that survival meant trusting what others called unreasonable, and here, in this quiet alley, his dog was telling him the same truth. Something was terribly wrong. "All right," Walter muttered, his voice breaking. "All right, boy, I hear you." He slipped the leash over Hunter's head. The shepherd lunged forward immediately, nearly dragging Walter with him. They stepped out into the freezing night, breath fogging in the air, Hunter straining toward the Donovan house. The townhouse loomed across the alley, its windows shuttered, its bricks glistening faintly with frost. Hunter barked furiously, pulling at the leash, his body trembling with urgency. Walter's heart hammered in his chest. He stood there, staring at the silent house, torn in two. Part of him clung to the rational, Lydia's polite words, her easy lies, the possibility that he was imagining things. But the other part, the soldier who had trusted his instincts in the dark, the handler who had followed his dog into floods and wreckage, knew better. Hunter barked again, the sound raw, commanding. His claws scraped the concrete, his body surging forward with all its strength. Walter staggered to keep hold, the leash taut between them. "Stop, boy! Stop!" he hissed, glancing toward the neighboring apartments where lights flickered on. Curtains twitched. A man leaned out a window and shouted, "Keep that mutt quiet!" Walter pulled Hunter back, his breath ragged, shame flushing his face. But Hunter did not stop. He howled again, sharp and unyielding, his body trembling with the urgency of a life-or-death command. Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. "What's in that house?" Hunter growled low, his eyes locked on the dark window across the alley. Walter tightened his grip on the leash, his body shaking with cold and something sharper. Fear. Not of Lydia, not of the neighbors, but of the possibility that he was too late to stop whatever was happening behind those walls. They stood there in the freezing dark, an old man and his dog, staring at the townhouse that gave away no secrets. But Walter's heart knew the pattern of taps, the lies on Lydia's lips, the fury in Hunter's cries. Something was wrong in that house, and for the first time, Walter could no longer pretend otherwise. The night was brittle with cold. Inside the Donovan townhouse, Amelia and Claire huddled on their mattress, fear heavier than hunger. Claire tapped against the window. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. While Amelia whispered in terror, "She'll hear." But silence had saved nothing. It was their only chance. Across the alley, Hunter stirred. The old German shepherd snapped to attention, ears pricked, body taut. In seconds, he was at the door, barking with such force it shook Walter from his chair. At first the old man scolded him, until he heard it too. 3. Pause. 2. Walter froze, blood cold. For weeks he'd dismissed Hunter's alarms as the restlessness of age, but now he heard the code himself. Hunter howled, scratching furiously at the door, amber eyes blazing with urgency. Walter clipped on the leash, and together they lunged into the frozen night. Hunter dragged him across the alley, barking at the Donovan house with wild desperation. Neighbors stirred, lights flickered on, murmurs filled the street. Walter felt the shame of doubt creeping in, until Hunter let out a howl so raw it silenced them all. Walter fumbled for his phone, voice breaking as he called 911. "This is Walter Briggs. My dog's a retired canine. He hears something in there. I heard it too. Knocking. A code. He's never wrong." The dispatcher promised officers were on their way. Red and blue lights soon bled across the street. Hunter barked furiously at the shuttered windows, his claws scraping the stoop. 2 officers stepped out, one young and skeptical, the other weary from too many false alarms. Walter stood firm. "He's not just barking. He's telling us something." 3. Pause. 2. "He's never wrong." Hunter lunged again, snarling at the dark house. And then, as if to answer him, the front door opened. Lydia Donovan appeared in the glow of the hallway light, her robe neat, her face calm. Too calm. "Officers?" she asked, her voice carrying the perfect blend of confusion and welcome. "Is something the matter?" Hunter snarled instantly, his teeth bared, his bark ferocious. He lunged forward so hard Walter nearly lost his grip. The shepherd's fury filled the alley, sharp and unrelenting, echoing off the bricks. Lydia's smile faltered only for a second before she laughed lightly. "Oh my, Mr. Briggs, your dog nearly gave me a heart attack." "What on earth is going on?" The younger officer stepped forward, giving Lydia a polite nod. "Ma'am, we got a call about some disturbance here. Your neighbor says his dog's been reacting to something at your house." Lydia tilted her head, letting out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Really? Oh dear. No, officers. Everything is perfectly fine. The girls are asleep upstairs. They've had a touch of a cold, so I've kept them in. But truly, there's nothing to worry about." Her tone was steady, her smile warm, her performance flawless. The older officer gave a slow nod. "Mind if we just take a quick look around, for procedure?" Lydia's eyes flickered, just briefly, before she opened the door wider. "Of course. Please, come in. I have nothing to hide." Hunter lunged again, barking so hard his body shook. His eyes were locked on the upstairs window, the one with the narrow pane of glass where frost clung. His barks grew more frenzied, as though he could sense the girls behind it, as though he could see through the curtain itself. Walter's throat tightened. "Look at him," he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. "Does that look like a dog barking at a raccoon? He knows something's in there." The younger officer shook his head. "Sir, with all due respect, I've seen plenty of dogs bark their lungs out at nothing. Doesn't always mean—" Hunter cut him off with a howl, long, guttural, filled with urgency. His paws scrabbled against the sidewalk, dragging Walter closer to the stoop. His bark shifted into rapid bursts, aimed squarely at the shuttered window above. Inside the hidden room, Amelia clutched Claire's hand. "He's still there," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "He's not leaving." Claire pressed her ear to the glass, heart racing. She tapped again, desperate. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. Her fist bruised against the pane, but she didn't care. "Hear us," she whispered, her voice lost in the dark. "Please, hear us." Hunter erupted with new fury, throwing himself toward the stoop, barking so loud it silenced even the murmuring neighbors. His entire body trembled with the force of it, his amber eyes blazing. Walter's voice cracked. "You think I'm just some old fool? Look at him. He's telling you. Something's wrong there. For God's sake, don't walk away." The older officer hesitated. His jaw tightened as he looked from Walter to the dog, then up at the darkened windows. Something in Hunter's relentless urgency pierced through his skepticism. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm. "We'll check upstairs." Lydia's mask slipped for half a second. Her smile faltered, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. "Really, officers, that's not necessary. You'll wake the girls." But Hunter barked again, sharper than before, his body nearly leaping out of Walter's grip. His cry seemed to split the night, undeniable now. The older officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, step aside. Now." And for the first time, Lydia's smile cracked completely. The alley pulsed with red and blue light, sirens painting the bricks in restless color. Hunter barked with a fury that rattled windows, his body lunging against the leash. Walter's grip trembled, knuckling white, as if he were holding back a storm that refused to be contained. Two officers stood on the Donovan stoop, their boots heavy, their expressions tired. In the doorway, Lydia Donovan leaned casually against the frame, her robe cinched, her smile polished and calm. "Officers, please," she said smoothly. "The girls are asleep. They've been sick. I don't want them disturbed. Truly, there's nothing here for you." The younger officer shifted uneasily, glancing at his partner. His look said it all. "False alarm. Let's go." Walter's voice cracked as he stepped forward. "Don't you walk away. That dog has never been wrong. Not once in his life." The officer sighed. "Sir, with respect, dogs bark. That's what they do. We can't tear through a family's home every time a neighbor's dog gets worked up." But Hunter's barks weren't ordinary. They dropped into a guttural growl, his whole body quaking, claws scraping the stoop until his nails splintered. His gaze was fixed on the upstairs window, unblinking, urgent. Walter's words came out raw, desperate. "He's a search and rescue dog. Worked disasters. Pulled people out of rubble when no one else could. He doesn't bark like this, unless there's a reason." The older officer hesitated, caught between procedure and the weight of the old man's conviction. "Mr. Briggs, without cause we can't—" A sound cut through his words. Soft, faint. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps. The alley was frozen. Walter's flashlight shook in his hand. "That's it. That's a code. You hear it. 3 and 2. That's not a radiator. That's a child knocking for help." The younger officer frowned, uncertain. Lydia's smile faltered for the briefest second. "Old house," she said quickly. "Radiators make all kinds of noises." But then it came again, louder this time. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. The older officer's jaw hardened. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to see the children." Lydia's composure cracked. Her voice sharpened. "That's ridiculous. You don't have the right—" Hunter howled, long and mournful, the sound slicing through the night like a blade. Neighbors leaned from windows, murmuring. Walter's plea broke into a whisper. "Please, don't turn your backs. Don't let them suffer another night." The decision snapped. The older officer's voice rang out. "We're going in." Lydia's mask shattered. "You can't!" she screamed, throwing her body across the doorway. Hunter lunged with a snarl so primal it froze everyone in place. Lydia stumbled back inside, startled, and that was all the officers needed. The older officer slammed his shoulder into the door once, twice. On the third strike, the lock exploded, and the door burst open. The smell hit immediately. Not a home, a tomb. The stench of mildew, rot, and fear clung to the walls. "Clear the rooms," the officer barked. Flashlights cut through peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. But Hunter didn't wait. He tore up the stairs, dragging Walter behind him. His barks grew frantic, echoing through the house. At the top, He hurled himself at a locked door, his body slamming against it with feral desperation. "Here!" Walter cried. The younger officer kicked hard. Once, twice. The wood splintered, then gave way. The beam of light swept the room and found them. Two small figures huddled in the corner, Amelia and Claire. They clung to each other so tightly, it seemed they were one trembling body. Their skin was pale, their clothes torn, their hair matted. Their hollow eyes blinked against the light, stunned, fragile. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible, "We knew you'd come." Claire tried to smile but broke into sobs instead. Walter's throat closed. Hunter whined, lowering himself to the floor and crawling forward until his nose brushed Claire's hand. Her fingers twitched, then clung desperately to his fur. "They're alive," Walter choked, tears streaming. "Dear God, they're alive." Chains hung from the radiator, still warm from small wrists. A stained mattress lay crumpled in the corner. This was no bedroom, it was a cell. An officer's voice cut through the static of his radio. "Two miners found. Alive. Request immediate medical assistance." From below, Lydia's shriek echoed up the stairs. "You have no right. You don't understand." Hunter's growl rumbled low, as if delivering judgment himself. Walter knelt, brushing hair from Amelia's face with trembling fingers. "You're safe now," he whispered. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." Amelia's lips quivered. "We tapped, the way Daddy taught us, so someone would hear." Walter squeezed her hand, steady. "And we did. We heard. And we came." The officers wrapped the girls in their jackets, lifting them gently. They were feather light, trembling, but alive, so achingly alive. As they carried them downstairs, Lydia waited like a cornered animal. Her mask was gone, her face twisted with rage and madness. She lunged at the officer holding Claire, her voice breaking into shrieks. "You can't take them. They belong here. You'll kill them out there." Her words were jagged, deranged, but Hunter moved like lightning, planting himself between the girls and the woman. His bark thundered, a gunshot of sound that froze her mid-lunge. "Control your dog," she screamed. Walter's voice was steady, firm. "He's doing what he was born to do. Protect." The officers dragged her back, cuffs snapping around her wrists as she thrashed and spat. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "You'll regret this." The squad car door slammed, cutting her off. And then, silence. The twins emerged into the glow of flashing lights, clutching each other's hands so tightly their knuckles whitened. The crowd of neighbors hushed, whispers dying as they watched. People who had waved at Lydia Donovan on morning walks now stared, stunned, at the horror she had hidden. Walter followed slowly, Hunter at his side. His vision blurred with tears as the officers carried the girls down the porch steps. He wanted to run, to embrace them, but he held back. This was their moment. Hunter padded forward on his own. No longer frantic, his movements were calm, deliberate. He sat at the bottom of the steps, tail wagging gently, amber eyes soft, waiting. Claire saw him first. She reached out, her hand trembling. Amelia followed, leaning against her sister. Their small fingers touched his fur. Hunter leaned into the contact, pressing his weight against them, a soft whine rising from his chest. His tail thumped harder, steady, reassuring. For the first time since being pulled from that dark room, the girls smiled. Fragile, trembling smiles, but smiles all the same. The crowd exhaled in one breath. Walter's sobs broke free. He covered his mouth, shoulders shaking, but he wasn't ashamed. Not tonight. Let them see. Let them see what loyalty looked like, what hope looked like. As the girls were lifted into the waiting ambulance, one officer bent low, murmuring, "You're safe now. You'll get warm. You'll get food. You'll heal." But Amelia's eyes never left Hunter. Claire pressed her face into his fur, whispering something too soft for anyone else. Hunter gave a low rumble in answer, as if he understood every word. The night was still raw, chaotic, sirens buzzing, neighbors whispering, Lydia screaming in the distance. But around the twins and the old K9, there was a circle of calm. It wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of healing. Walter laid a hand on Hunter's back, steady. His voice broke into a whisper. "You did it, boy. You saved them." Hunter glanced up, amber eyes glinting beneath the streetlights. His tail swayed gently. He needed no medals, no applause. This was his purpose, his reason. And in that moment, beneath flashing lights, with 2 fragile lives reclaimed, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't just an arrest. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a rebirth. The growl of a diesel engine thundered down the street before headlights even appeared. Gravel scattered as a pickup skidded against the curb, brakes screaming. The door flew open before the truck even stopped rumbling. A man stumbled out, boots slamming pavement, his face ghost white. Patrick. He hadn't even turned off the ignition. The truck sat idling, headlights spilling across mailboxes and hedges, while he sprinted toward the red and blue glow of police cruisers. His breath ripped through him, harsh and ragged, but he didn't feel the cold wind cutting his jacket open. All he felt was the crushing weight of a father's fear. The words from the police radio still echoed in his head. 2 miners recovered alive, Donovan residents. He'd dropped everything, tools, phone, the untouched sandwich from morning, and driven like a man possessed. Now, in the chaos of flashing lights and shouting neighbors, his eyes scoured frantically. Officers moved in and out of the house. People whispered, craning their necks. But none of it mattered. He was searching for one thing, for them. And then he saw 2 small figures bundled in oversized jackets, pale faces caught in the harsh glare of ambulance floodlights. Patrick's knees buckled, his throat locked. For a moment, he thought his body would collapse. Amelia. Claire. The names tore from him like a prayer. He surged forward, colliding with an officer's chest. Strong arms caught him back. "Sir, wait." But Patrick fought like a drowning man. "Those are my girls. Those are my daughters." Recognition flickered in the officer's eyes, and the grip loosened. Patrick stumbled past, half running, half falling, until he was there, right there, beside the stretcher. The twins turned at the sound of his voice. For a heartbeat, time froze. Amelia's lips parted, a gasp breaking free. Claire blinked, as if afraid her eyes were lying. Then the spell shattered. "Daddy!" They cried out together, the word ripping through the night, sharp as glass and unbreakable as iron. Patrick dropped to his knees on wet asphalt, gravel biting through his jeans. Arms flung wide, he braced for the impact as his daughters hurled themselves into him. The collision nearly toppled him, but he clutched them in, crushing them against his chest like a lifeline. Their arms wrapped tight around his neck, tears soaking his shirt. His own sobs tore loose, raw and guttural. I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd never see you again." Amelia buried her face against him, whispering, "We were so scared." Claire lifted her head just enough to add, voice trembling, "But Hunter, he found us." Patrick followed her gaze and saw him. A few feet away, the old German shepherd sat, amber eyes steady, tail sweeping slowly against the ground. He hadn't intruded. He hadn't moved closer. He simply watched, as if guarding the reunion itself. Patrick's breath hitched. He had known Hunter for years as Walter's companion. But seeing him here, seeing the way his daughters clung to him, Patrick understood in an instant. This wasn't just a dog. This was their savior. He reached out a trembling hand. Hunter rose and padded forward, closing the distance with quiet certainty. Patrick's fingers sank into the thick fur of his neck, and the dog leaned into the touch with a low rumble, steady and grounding. "Thank you," Patrick whispered hoarsely. "God, thank you." For a long moment, nothing else existed. The hum of radios, the whispers of neighbors, even the flashing lights blurred into background noise. All that mattered was the heat of two small bodies against his chest and the rough fur beneath his hand. 3 heartbeats, steadying into one. But reality pressed back in. Paramedics urged gently, "Sir, we need to get them to the hospital. They've been through a lot." Patrick nodded, though his arms refused to let go. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered fiercely into their hair. "Not ever again. Wherever they take you, I'll be there. Every step." The girls loosened their grip reluctantly, reassured by his vow. Paramedics lifted them carefully onto the stretcher, jackets wrapped tight around fragile frames. Patrick climbed into the ambulance beside them, refusing to let the doors close without him. Before stepping in, he turned once more. His eyes found Walter standing at the edge of the scene, hand resting on Hunter's back. The old man looked drained, but his gaze shone with quiet relief. Their eyes met. Patrick's lips formed the words, "Thank you." Walter nodded, squeezing Hunter's neck gently. The ambulance doors shut. The siren wailed. For the first time in months, Patrick allowed himself to breathe. Not with certainty, not with ease, but with something he had thought lost forever. Hope. The street buzzed with noise. Radios crackling, reporters shouting, neighbors clutching blankets against the cold. Yet amid the chaos, a hush seemed to settle around the memory of that embrace. Patrick's collapsed to his knees, the twins' desperate cry of "Daddy," the way they clung together as if to fuse into one body, it seared itself into every witness. And always, just in frame, the dog sat watchful, silent, steady. The cameras caught it. A still image, a father on the pavement, arms around his daughters, and at their side, a German shepherd carved from loyalty itself. Reporters whispered to one another, "That's the shot." But it wasn't until Amelia, her hand still tangled in her father's sleeve, leaned close to a microphone that the story crystallized. Her voice was soft, cracked with exhaustion, but clear enough to pierce the night. "The dog saved us." The words fell like a stone into water, rippling outward. Officers froze mid-step. A cameraman lowered his lens, throat tight. Patrick's breath caught as he turned toward his daughter, then toward Hunter. Hunter didn't react. No bark, no movement. Only a single thump of his tail against the pavement, slow and steady, as though affirming the truth. Reporters stammered, "The dog? Saved you?" Amelia nodded, eyes shining. "He wouldn't leave us. He barked until someone came." Her voice broke, but she lifted her chin with fragile defiance. Claire, still pressed to her father's side, whispered, He stayed with us in the dark. We weren't alone. Patrick's face crumpled. He kissed the tops of their heads, then reached for Hunter again, fingers trembling in his fur. Hunter leaned gently into the contact, as if to steady him too. Flashbulbs erupted. Not for spectacle, for witness. Because what unfolded that night wasn't just a rescue. It was a story. And in that story, the dog was not a footnote. He was the center. By morning, the photograph was on front pages across the country. The headline varied, but the phrase repeated, "The dog who wouldn't leave." The clip of Amelia's small, trembling voice whispering, "The dog saved us," replayed endlessly. In living rooms, mothers pulled children closer. In diners, patrons set down their forks and watched in silence. In newsrooms, hardened anchors swallowed hard before speaking. For those who had been there, the image was only part of the truth. They remembered the silence that had fallen before Amelia spoke, the weight of her words, a child's testimony that could never be manufactured. On that night, beneath the sweep of red and blue lights, Hunter shifted once more, lying down at last. Calm, rooted. His eyes never left the family he had fought to protect. Patrick, drained but unwilling to release his daughters, looked down at the dog. His lips moved silently, a word no one else heard. A promise only Hunter would carry. When officers finally guided the family toward the ambulance, Amelia and Claire clutched their father's hands. Just before climbing inside, they turned back. Their eyes searched until they found him. "He's our hero," Amelia whispered. Hunter's ears flicked. His gaze held theirs until the doors closed. The dog sat alone again, surrounded by strangers and flashing lights. But in that solitude, there was no loneliness. He had fulfilled what he was born to do. Not for medals, not for command, but for something higher. To protect the innocent until safety returned. And in living rooms across the nation, people repeated the same words Amelia had whispered into the night. The dog saved them. The next morning, the world felt different. Not in ways that toppled governments or rewrote history, but in small, intimate ways that threaded through hearts everywhere. On screens across continents, the image replayed again and again, Patrick kneeling with his daughters clutched tight, and behind them, Hunter, calm, steady, his dark eyes holding the weight of courage. And then came Amelia's whisper, "The dog saved us." That single line stopped newsrooms in their tracks. Anchors fumbled for composure. Journalists bowed their heads, unable to spin it into anything more than what it was. Truth spoken by a child. Social media erupted. The clip spread millions of times in hours. Captions poured out like prayers. Every child deserves a Hunter in their life. Faith in heroes restored. This is loyalty. People shared their own stories of rescue dogs, of animals who had sensed danger before any human did. Heart emojis, candles, paw prints. A global heartbeat of gratitude. For Walter Briggs, it was surreal. He sat on his porch, coffee cooling in his hands, scrolling through endless messages. Strangers offered money, sponsorships, even to adopt Hunter. They didn't understand. Hunter already had a home, a purpose, and a bond no one could buy. Walter shook his head, equal parts pride and disbelief. He didn't need accolades. Hunter had done what he was born to do. Still, the outpouring humbled him. Families across the globe gathered around screens, whispering to their children, "See, there's still goodness left in the world," and millions nodded, silently agreeing. Outside the Donovan house, life changed too. The shuttered windows were no longer just wood and glass. They had become a scar, a reminder of what had been hidden in plain sight. Parents pointed them out as a lesson. Pay attention, listen, protect. Children drew pictures in chalk on the sidewalk. 3 dots, a pause, 2 dots. The code that had saved Amelia and Claire. That night, Bergen Street glowed with candles. Neighbors stepped from their stoops, hands cupping small flames. No speeches, no ceremony, just quiet reverence. Somebody left knitted blue hats on the rail with a note, "For going home, warm." A child placed stuffed bears on the step, eyes turned toward the house as if keeping guard. Walter hadn't planned to attend. The attention sat awkwardly on his shoulders, but Hunter stood at the window, ears forward, tail still. His silent insistence was its own leash. "All right, partner," Walter sighed, slipping on the lead. When they stepped into the candlelight, conversations folded into hush. People made space. A boy in a red parka pointed, whispering, "Is that him?" But his eyes already knew. Hunter sat at the base of the stoop, spine straight, eyes soft. When the wind threatened to snuff the flames, neighbors shielded them with their bodies until the candles steadied again. For the first time in years, the block breathed as one. Within days, muralists arrived. Buckets of paint clattered on the sidewalk, ladders scraping brick. The lead artist, B, called to the crowd, "Bring what you want remembered." The wall transformed under their brushes. First Hunter, not fierce, but calm, his strength drawn in soft geometry, the gentleness in his eyes. Beside him, 2 small hands pressed into his fur. Patrick's arms encircled them, not as chains, but as love lowering itself to the ground. Neighbors offered pieces of themselves. A carpenter hammered old nails into the frame, 3 on one side, 2 on the other. A grandmother slipped the artist a silver tag from her own shepherd. It was painted into the corner like a secret. High school students painted fireflies and stars, 3 and 2, stitched into the sky. Patrick brought the twins the evening the mural was unveiled. They wore the knitted hats left on the stoop. The crowd parted silently. Claire's fingers brushed the painted fur. "It looks like him," she whispered. Amelia smiled at the real Hunter, sitting beside Walter, watching. Both girls laid their hands in his ruff, and the old dog exhaled one steady breath, as if the world itself could finally rest. Applause rose, gentle and grateful, like rain on a roof. By morning, newspapers carried the mural alongside the original photograph. Hunter was no longer just a dog. He was a symbol. The headline repeated everywhere, "The dog who heard the cry." Weeks later, the courthouse became the stage for justice. Lydia Donovan sat in grey prison garb, her wrists shackled, her once practiced smile gone. The gallery brimmed with neighbors, reporters, strangers, all staring, silently asking the same question. How could she? The prosecutor's voice was steady as he laid out the evidence. The bruises, the malnourishment, the chains. And threaded through it all was the detail that silenced the room. Hunter's barking that night, his refusal to stop until someone listened. The footage played on the courtroom monitor once more. The dog sitting quietly behind Amelia, his amber eyes locked on her as if daring the world to try again. Jurors shifted. One woman dabbed her eyes. The defense tried to paint Lydia as overwhelmed, misunderstood. But the testimony crushed every word. Teachers described the girl's fear when Lydia appeared. A social worker admitted she had missed the signs. And then came Amelia, her small hand resting on Claire's as she whispered once more, "The dog saved us." It was not evidence in the legal sense, but in the moral sense, it was everything. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Lydia showed no tears, no apology, only a clenched jaw as deputies led her away. Outside, the city exhaled. Neighbors applauded quietly, a sound of release rather than triumph. Candles and flowers multiplied at the mural. Children traced the code. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, over and over in chalk. When Patrick and the twins stepped out, Hunter trotted beside them. Cameras turned, but for once, the story wasn't about the crime, or the courtroom, or even Lydia. It was about resilience, about loyalty, about a truth that refused to be silenced. Hunter walked calmly, ears alert, tail sweeping gently as Amelia and Claire reached down to touch his fur. The world watched as the 3 of them moved forward together. Father, daughters, and the dog who had heard their cry. And in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just survival, it was renewed. Hunter, once overlooked, had become the way an entire community, an entire nation, remembered what loyalty looked like. The world had seen Amelia and Claire step out of that house, pale, trembling, their steps unsteady, but their spirits stubbornly unbroken. Yet survival was only the first chapter. Freedom was not a switch to be flipped. It was a language they had to relearn, syllable by syllable. The Donovan home no longer echoed with fear. Volunteers scrubbed the walls, replaced broken locks, filled rooms with quilts, books, and stuffed animals. Bread baked in the oven, candles glowed in the windows. Yet the sisters still paused mid-step, bracing for a door to slam, for a voice to bark their names with venom. Their therapist, Dr. Hensley, reminded Margaret Lane, their aunt and new guardian, that recovery would come slowly. "Every smile matters," she said. "Every laugh is proof they're building new memories." And so the milestones were small. One morning, Amelia giggled at a cartoon coyote who could never catch his bird. It was soft, almost fragile, but it cracked the silence. Claire turned toward the sound, smiled faintly, then leaned into her sister. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back tears. Meals became small revolutions. No longer scraps swallowed in secrecy, but plates of macaroni lingered over. Peas tasted cautiously only after Margaret whispered, "It's all yours. No one will take it." The sisters learned to eat slowly, deliberately. Luxury disguised as normalcy. Nights remained hardest. Shadows whispered of the basement. But Hunter, the old German shepherd, scarred yet steadfast, made the darkness bearable. He chose his spot not at the door, but at the foot of their bed. Each time they stirred, his head lifted, amber eyes steady, before lowering again with a sigh. His breathing became their lullaby. For the first time in years, they slept through the night. The city still followed their progress, but inside the home, healing was private. Claire drew pictures of houses with open windows, stick figures with balloons, always with a dog in the center. Amelia spoke of dreams, some filled with lockers at school, some still haunted by Lydia's voice. Dr. Hensley told her gently, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering. Doesn't control you anymore." Hunter often joined the sessions. Amelia rested her hand on his fur and whispered, "He makes me brave." Claire added, "He knows when I'm sad before I cry." The doctor noted, "This dog is not only comfortable, he is in therapy." A bridge between fear and trust. School returned slowly. Margaret walked them to class, teachers briefed to be gentle but not pitying. On the first day, whispers followed them down hallways. They were the girls from the news. Amelia froze under the weight of the stairs, but when a boy offered her a pencil and a girl invited Claire to lunch, something softened. By week's weekend, they were playing tag. Their laughter, thin, tentative, carried across the yard. Shadows remained. Some nights, Amelia lay awake, fists clenched, staring at the ceiling. Some mornings Claire refused to step outside, but Margaret celebrated every step forward, no matter how small. One evening, a neighbor paused on the porch and whispered, "You're the bravest girls in the world." Amelia blushed. Claire buried her face in Hunter's fur. Margaret realized then that their story, shared across millions of screens, wasn't about fame. It was about these quiet moments, cartoons, comfort in meals, the steady thump of a dog's tail. At the hospital, where they had first been treated, staff noticed the same truth. Hunter was better than medicine. The twins always knew when he arrived. Their faces brightened before Walter Briggs even knocked. When he entered, they buried themselves in the shepherd's fur, gripping him like a lifeline. Hunter lowered himself instinctively, steady and unflinching. Amelia whispered secrets into his ear. Claire pressed her cheek into his shoulder, murmuring nightmares no adult had coaxed from her. He absorbed it all in silence. For once, their words were safe. Nurses paused at the door. "It's better than therapy," one murmured. And in many ways, it was. After Hunter left, the girls ate more, slept longer, dreamed softer. They developed rituals. Amelia pressed his paw to her chest. "Heartbeat friends," she called it. Claire draped a blanket across his back, declaring him safe to sleep with. One rainy afternoon, Claire whispered into his fur, "Don't go back to the cage." Walter's throat tightened. Amelia added fiercely, "He belongs with us." Walter only stroked Hunter's back and whispered, "We'll figure it out." The psychologist soon wrote in her notes, "They trust him first. Through him, they are learning to trust us." When Amelia asked one night, "Will he forget us?" Walter knelt and said firmly, "Hunter never forgets. Once you're his forever." The dog sealed the promise with a gentle lick across her cheek. But healing was not only theirs. Patrick Donovan, their father, carried his own wreckage. He had imagined their reunion 1,000 times, sprinting, lifting them into his arms, the nightmare dissolving. Instead, when he first saw them in the hospital, they looked at him as if from a distance. That look haunted him. Back home, Patrick sat at the kitchen table, coffee cold, rehearsing words. He wanted to promise they'd never be hurt again. But words weren't enough. He realized he had to learn how to listen. His first attempts were clumsy. When Amelia asked if Hunter could stay longer, Patrick blurted, "But he's just a dog. Don't you want more time with me?" The hurt in her eyes told him he'd failed again. That night, alone in his car, he whispered to himself, You can't demand their trust. You have to earn it, slowly. So he tried again. When the girls whispered into Hunter's fur, Patrick didn't interrupt. He sat nearby, silent, letting their voices wash over him. Hunter was the bridge, and Patrick chose to walk it step by step. In therapy, a counselor told him, "Your girls don't need a hero. They need safe. That means listening, even when it hurts." He practiced. When Claire pushed away her spaghetti, he didn't bark orders. He asked softly, "Not hungry, or is it the smell?" Claire whispered, "It reminds me of her." He quietly swapped the plate for toast and butter. Her shoulders loosened. When Amelia asked to sleep with the lights on, Patrick didn't protest. He said simply, "As bright as you want." Then he sat in the hallway, watching the glow under their door until they slept. Guilt haunted him still. In therapy, he admitted, "I ignored the signs. I wanted to believe love would fix everything. My blindness cost my daughters their safety." It broke him, but speaking it aloud was the start of change. One rainy afternoon, Amelia muttered, "You don't know us anymore." The words cut deep, but Patrick answered, "Then let me teach you all over again. Will you let me?" Later, she slid him a crayon drawing of herself, Claire, and him together. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Hunter remained at the center. Each time the girls pressed into his fur, Patrick waited. One day, Amelia turned mid-laugh and repeated a secret aloud, letting her father hear. Patrick nearly wept at the fragile grace of being included. By autumn, he noticed change. He no longer rushed. He no longer filled silences. Instead, he showed trustworthiness in quiet ways, making breakfast without comment, waiting outside their room until nightmares passed, showing up, steady and unshaken. It was far from perfect. Some days Amelia refused to speak to him. Some nights, Claire recoiled from his hug. But Patrick learned not to see those as failures. Healing, he realized, was not a straight road. It was 2 steps forward, 1 back, and the courage to keep walking. One night, Claire surprised him. She reached out, her small hand brushing his. "Daddy, can you stay until we fall asleep?" Patrick's throat tightened. He lowered himself into the chair beside their bed. "For as long as you need." As the girls drifted into dreams, Hunter curled at their feet. Patrick sat in silence, realizing the truth. Fatherhood wasn't about being a hero. It wasn't even about protection. It was about presence, patient, steady, listening. And in that stillness, he felt hope flicker, fragile but real. One day he believed his daughters would look at him, not with distance, but with trust again. The great hall of City Hall had never been so full. Rows of chairs stretched to the back wall, every seat taken. Teachers, firefighters, police officers, neighbors, parents, and children packed together, waiting, murmuring in low voices until the mayor's gavel struck the podium. On stage, the spotlight shone on a German shepherd, sitting tall and steady. His coat gleamed, his ears perked, his amber eyes calm yet watchful. Around his neck, for the first time since the rescue, rested a polished silver badge. The nameplate on it read, "Hunter." The mayor's voice rang out. "Today, we honor a hero, not a man in uniform, not a decorated official, but a dog who, when no one else could hear, listened, when no one else dared, acted, and because he did, 12 children are alive today. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thundering. It rolled through the chamber, filling every corner, spilling out the doors into the streets. People rose to their feet. Some wiped away tears. Some simply clapped until their palms burned. Hunter didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. And then, like an arrow cutting through the noise, came two small voices. "Hunter!" From the front row, Amelia and Claire broke free of their father's hands and sprinted across the stage. The crowd gasped, then fell into hushed silence. The girls threw their arms around the shepherd, burying their faces in his fur. His head dipped, pressing back against them, calm and steady, as if to say, "I'm here. I always will be." The mayor stepped back, his words caught in his throat. At that moment, the ceremony no longer belonged to the officials or the cameras. It belonged to them, 2 children and the dog who had carried them out of darkness. Weeks later, another chamber echoed with a different kind of sound. The stone walls of the state legislative hall heard the shuffle of papers, the clearing of throats, the creak of wooden benches. Lawmakers sat at their desks, listening as witnesses gave testimony. At the front, Patrick Donovan's hands trembled as he adjusted the microphone. His daughters sat behind him, Hunter stretched across their feet. Patrick's voice broke more than once as he described what had been hidden in plain sight, how no system had caught it. Only a dog had. He spoke not as a father ashamed, but as a man determined to change the ground rules. When it was Amelia's turn, she stepped forward, clutching Hunter's leash. Her voice was small, but steady. "He heard us when no one else did. He saved us. I don't want any other kids to wait for a dog to save them. People should listen first." Silence filled the chamber. Even the clicking of reporters' keys stopped. The Speaker of the House leaned forward, eyes wet. When the vote came, it wasn't close. With an overwhelming majority, the Hunter Act passed into law, creating stronger protections, oversight, and mandatory welfare checks for children at risk. The gavel struck. The crowd rose. For once, it wasn't politics. It was justice. That evening, a photo spread across the country. Amelia standing with Hunter at her side, her hand gripping his fur, her eyes bright but unafraid. The caption beneath read, "Every child deserves a Hunter." Seasons turned, headlines faded. But in a quiet neighborhood, healing continued, not on stages or in chambers, but in the rhythm of everyday life. The Donovan home was no longer dim. Curtains were pulled back. Windows let sunlight in. Laughter, cautious at first, then brighter, began to echo through the rooms. Patrick learned to pack lunches, to braid hair clumsily, to sit on the floor for tea parties even when his knees ached. The girls, once flinching at shadows, learned to sleep through the night. Their nightmares eased because a shepherd lay stretched across their doorway, ears twitching at every creak, heart beating steady as a drum. Hunter aged, his muzzle touched with silver, but his role never dimmed. He was the bridge between terror and trust, between yesterday's scars and tomorrow's freedom. One spring afternoon, Patrick drove the family back to the street they once feared. The house where they had been locked away still stood, but the shutters were gone, the doors open, the windows filled with new tenants. Amelia's hand tightened in his. "It doesn't feel the same anymore." "No," Patrick said quietly, "because we're not the same anymore." Claire, ever braver now, looked up at him. "Can we go home?" Patrick smiled. The first smile in years that felt whole. We already are. And so they walked away, hand in hand, Hunter trotting beside them. Past neighbors waved. Children on bicycles pointed at the shepherd, whispering his name like a legend. At the corner, the girls broke into a run, pulling Patrick forward. Their laughter rose, clear and unbroken. Hunter's ears perked, his tail lifted, and for a brief moment, his stride matched theirs, as if he were young again, as if he, too, felt the joy of being free. That night, Patrick stood in the doorway of his daughter's room. Amelia and Claire lay asleep beneath quilts stitched with their grandmother's hands. Hunter curled at the foot of their bed, chest rising and falling with each slow breath. Patrick whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." Hunter did not stir. He didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken, not in words, but in all that had been rebuilt. Trust, safety, family. The past would always leave scars. But now, those scars carried light. And at the heart of it stood a shepherd named Hunter, the dog who refused to be silent, the guardian who turned despair into hope, and whose legacy had changed not only one family, but countless others. Sometimes the most powerful reminders of love, loyalty, and resilience don't come from people at all. They come from the steady eyes and wagging tail of a dog. Stories like Hunter's show us how deeply German shepherds and other working dogs can touch lives, not just through bravery, but through the quiet, unwavering bond they share with us. They teach us patience, remind us what it means to protect without question, and help us heal in ways words can't always reach. If you've ever looked at your own dog and felt that silent connection, the kind that feels like they understand you without needing to say a word, you already know how special it is. There are simple ways to deepen that bond, to understand them better, and to give back even a fraction of the love they give us every day. I recently came across a resource that might help with that, and if you'd like, you can take a look for yourself. Think of it as a gentle invitation from one dog lover to another. Sometimes, the smallest steps we take with them can leave the longest marks on our hearts.